Horror Kiwi contains spoilers and may include discussion or mention of potentially disturbing subjects. But don't let that deter you. Now, with that out of the way, let's get started, shall we? After you.
Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Horror Kiwi podcast for 2016. There's been a slight change of schedule. Our scheduled guest for this week had some personal stuff come up and we had to reschedule her for later in the month. That said, I brought up the guest I had planned for next week, who people who listen to Anime Kiwi or I guess maybe the Mist Let's Play will recognize, to talk about Nosferatu from 1922 and Shadow of the Vampire from 2000. I'm Mike. Introduce yourself, guest.
I'm not much of a guest, aren't I? It's
Well,
just
to
me,
this
regular
you
old,
are, I guess.
regular old cat doder. Nothing special about me.
Well, that's true.
Hey, that's below the belt. I'm allowed to make fun of myself.
Anyways, we watched these movies. What did you think of them?
Oh, it's probably really difficult to talk about Nosferatu, like, because you read up on it and stuff. There's all this really effusive and talk about it, like one of the greatest films of all time and stuff. But like realistically, a film from 1922, it's there's gonna be a lot about it that, as like if you just watch it as like a modern person who, you think about film in a certain way, it's not really going to hold up. Like a film from that long ago just isn't going to hold up, like no matter what. And
I don't know.
but
I thought it had a few special effects in it, and I thought those were pretty impressive for how early as a film it was.
yeah, as I was about to say, like there's like without the historical perspective on the film, there's just not a lot about it that's remarkable, I think. Like obviously, if you think about it in the historical sense, there's probably a lot about it that was very groundbreaking for the time, and we probably owe a lot to that film in terms of things that came after it. But if you just judge it like today as a person who's just watching a movie, there's not a lot about it that I thought like, yeah, this is totally great, and I watched this voluntarily on my own time.
I thought it was fine.
Like it's fine for what it is, yeah. But I think like the thing that really bothered me about it is like the plot doesn't really come together at all. It's just some stuff happens and then it ends, Like
Yeah, the ending was a major deviation from Dracula, which, as you might have known already, and as we certainly learned from the beginning of Shadow of the Vampire, this was basically just a Dracula with the numbers filed off.
Yeah, pretty much. And I think the story suffers as a result of that. Like the characters from Dracula that it cuts and the details that it changed, like all of that stuff makes the story worse. And you've got example of like the character Nock, who is supposed to be like one of Orlok's thralls, I guess. And he just does nothing in the entire movie except get caught once and then put back in the cell. And it's little examples like that. And I think like this movie is really backloaded as well. Like it's really, really boring for like maybe 70% of the movie, and then like some exciting stuff happens towards the end, and then it just ends. Like, and so like obviously, I think everybody out there, even if they haven't seen Nosferatu, probably has seen that shot of him of his shadow like moving up the stairs.
Yeah,
like that's one of the most famous shots in like all of movies, I guess. But it's not until you watch the film that you like realize that there's maybe like 2 or 3 more shots like that in the film, and then the rest of it is fairly standard, like lots of flat, wide shots and nothing really remarkable going on with the cinematography.
Except for those few
like,
special effects that were okay.
Yeah, the special effects were probably pretty groundbreaking for the time, but
I mean, I don't know how they would have done it with.
Like Lumiere was doing that stuff years before, but
Oh, was he? Okay. I don't know that much about this early a film.
But if you look at like there's some other shots where, you know, the one where people are being like carted out in coffins and there's like a line of them down the street.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great shot, you know, and the shot of like the shadow going over like Ellen's body and stuff. Shots like that are really good because when you're shooting without color, like they were back then, like one of the primary tools that you have to create images and stuff is light and shadow, obviously. So when the film does make an effort to play with light and shadow, that's its strongest moments. That's the moments that stick with you in the film. And I think it could have used a lot more of that, like a lot less shots of Orlok just standing there in a flat wide shot and more shots of him out of the frame and letting your mind do the rest, which I guess, you know, filmmakers learnt that later on, obviously.
Yeah, because how many years had film been a thing at this point? I don't know. What, like, when was film? Turn of the century?
Yeah, definitely around turn of the century. I think like the first couple like things were shot with film was like 1898 or something, around there at least.
So it's been like 20, 30 years tops. So they hadn't really delved into film theory, I guess.
Yeah, like a lot of the language of film has been established here. Like you've got establishing shots and you've got like jump cuts, and like the idea of linear editing has been pretty firmly established by this time. But a lot of the more like more in-depth like cinematography hasn't really been developed yet. So as I mentioned, there's just a lot of flat wide shots. Very rarely do they use a close-up, and it's a lot of like the movie kind of struggles to tell a story with just pictures, and just kind of. And there's also something else that bothered me. Like, it seems like the movie assumes that you've either read or like have experienced the Dracula story in some way. And so they kind of just imply the story and like assume that the audience already knows how the story goes, and the movie's just sort of
that may be
like
a sound assumption for that time period, because I'm pretty sure Dracula was like a big fucking deal when that came out.
Yeah, and I've no doubt about that, but at the same time, I think that's probably not a good thing, like storytelling wise.
It's not great.
So, like, it may sound that I'm being really down and harsh on this film, but as I keep saying, like, you have to have the perspective that this was made in 1921, you know? So, like, it's just a lot of things that filmmakers had learnt just from trying stuff that hadn't been established yet.
Yeah.
And, so I think this film was probably, like, the best thing that you could make at this time. Like, with that budget and with that knowledge. Like, the best film that you could possibly make, this is probably it. Although, I think, like, Battleship Potemkin's probably a better film.
I mean, this is, I can't think of other really early examples of horror movie either.
Yeah, I think this movie's probably responsible for a lot of the language of horror later on, at least.
Yeah. I think it's probably fair to say that this maybe isn't a good movie for the modern general public, but it's probably really good for the modern film student.
Yeah, I think a historical perspective on film is extremely important if you're learning that stuff.
It's a classroom film more than a funsies film.
Yeah, definitely. I'd also say if you're a person that finds like criticizing film very important, and this is something that you should probably watch, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it's just when you watch something like this, you have to think about it in a different way, and it's kind of like exercising your critical muscles, so to speak. So, yeah, I would recommend like anybody who likes to think about movies in more of a I don't know, I liked it sort of way, that they should probably watch this at least once.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, do you know which version you watched?
I watched a Blu-ray copy from like 2007, I think.
Okay, so do you know if it was, I think it's called the Kino restoration?
I think it was that
Okay.
version, yeah.
Okay, because I heard that one it's the longest runtime and has the best score for the movie.
Yeah, the score is good. It's maybe a little bit overbearing in spots, but, you know, it's a silent film, so the music's doing like 70% of the work anyway.
Half the storytelling, yeah.
It's very much a like a symphonic score. It's not really a movie score.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an orchestral score.
Like if you think about this as the movie's more of a symphony, and the pictures are playing like second fiddle, then I think that probably is a lot more of an enjoyable way to watch it, because there's a lot of good music going on here.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the movie's not quite so remarkable, but having like the pictures be like a tone piece for the music is probably, and it was probably made that way if you think about it.
It's very possible.
Where this was more of an orchestra, like a symphony. Somebody wrote a symphony, and the pictures are just a secondary part of it, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's Nosferatu, I guess. There's not a lot else to say about it.
I didn't expect it to be a full modern feature length. So I didn't think they were doing that with silent films at that point.
Yeah, there's been a bunch of feature length silent stuff before this. I think Battleship Potemkin might have been the first one. I'm not sure, like feature length, but yeah, it's got a lot of really interesting stuff in that movie as well. Which those two movies will probably come up in pairs a lot when talking about early film, like Nosferatu and Battleship Potemkin.
Mm-hmm.
So those would be the two that I would tell people to watch if they're looking at silent films from that era.
Okay. Yeah, I can't think of a lot else to say. I did note in here that it seemed to me that like 90s FMV games kind of draw a lot of the same feeling that this movie, and I assume other silent films, kind of had, with the massive overreaction for shots and that kind of stuff, and the way they display information that they're reading.
You mean the the overacting and stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. It's kind of an interesting comparison when you make that, because like 90s FMV games, that's kind of like the silent movie era of video games, if you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, like the really poorly established acting techniques and just really poor use of like ludic language and stuff. That's a really interesting comparison to make, I think.
The main difference is games had sound and color and years of like acting precedent to go on.
Yeah, but then you've got inexperienced filmmakers and people who don't know how to apply that knowledge in a ludic sense to games, and then you get something like FMV games, which were 90% terrible. Like even the best FMV games, like Myst or something, even the acting in that's pretty rubbish.
Is pretty rough, yeah. Myst was exactly what I was thinking of when this thought came in my head. Is when they were showing the pages in the book he was reading, and it looked straight up like a page you find on the ground in Myst.
Yeah, it's very much mugging for the camera. Kind of have to do that stuff without sound, I guess. But it also comes back to the lots of flat wide shots. Like if they don't know to have the camera in close for reaction shots, and that way that the actors can play the moment much more subtle, then they kind of have to overreact, because they're doing much more like stage acting than they are film acting, really.
Mm-hmm. Which they might have been, because especially if you look at old BBC stuff, that's even into like the 60s, that's basically what they were doing.
Yeah, those TV movies and from the BBC are pretty much just stage plays with a camera plunked down.
And then you get some of the stuff they do now that's movies kind of trying to be stage plays.
You mean like bottle movies sort of things?
Like no, like the Shakespeare movies that you get on the BBC. Like they did
Oh,
Hamlet
yeah,
a while
true.
ago. So they're kind of, I guess, maybe not inadvertently, but they're flipping how things used to be to how they are now.
So it's like kind of a nostalgic thing, I guess, for BBC doing that sort of thing.
Yeah, maybe, kinda. Makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think that's Nosferatu. I don't have anything else to say about it.
Yeah, it's going in, like, my primary thought was how much of this is going to be cultural artifact and how much of this is going to be, like, genuinely good watchable film today. And I think it's much more of a cultural artifact
Mm-hmm.
than maybe I even expected, but yeah, there's just a lot about it that that's important, and I guess we should all, people like me who like to think about stuff a bit a bit more than just surface level, should probably watch it.
It's historically significant, at the very least.
Yeah, very much so.
Anyways, before we get to the next thing, have you watched or read or consumed any other horror media recently?
Not a lot, but so horror and I kind of have a bad relationship, I guess.
Oh?
Um, yeah, like I find things like gore and stuff to be like, it's just not my bag.
Mm-hmm.
Like in episode 1, you guys discussed like Itchy the Killer and like Kill List or something, right?
Yeah, each of the killer's not your thing if you don't like gore.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, if so, like, let's say this episode was gonna be Itchy the Killer or something, and then, like, just flip it, and you said, okay, you have to watch this for Horror Kiwi, I would have just straight up refused. Like, you just wouldn't have an episode.
Well, good thing I didn't do that then.
Yeah. I think when it comes to horror, and this is entirely a personal opinion, but there's kind of like two schools of horror. There's the, you know, scratch that lizard part of your brain and make you paranoid and terrified and like anxious. And then there's the school of horror where they're just trying to disgust you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, put as many things on the screen that will make the person disgusted as possible. And I don't think that's like a compelling thing for me to experience at all. I don't think there's much merit to that sort of filmmaking.
So you're not a big Sam Raimi fan?
No, if anything, I appreciate his style of filmmaking much more than I would simple like gore porn type filmmakers, because he knows how to play it for an effect that is more than just disgust. Like, he knows how to have a scene of somebody chopping off their own hand be really funny, you know? And he's a really deft filmmaker who knows how to take gore and make it part of the story and make it something that needs to be in the film. Like, it would be worse if you took it out.
Well, Ichi the Killer is kind of like that. I still think you probably wouldn't like it, but Miike kind of knows how to hit those same notes that Raimi does, and we talked about this last week, so I won't continue on about it.
Yeah, but like when it comes to like more savage stuff where it's just like scenes of people in like miserable pain and screaming and stuff, I just hate that shit and I don't want to watch it.
Mm.
Yeah, but I think like the most recent thing that I would describe as horror that I've seen is Green Room, and I think most people probably wouldn't even call it a horror film, but I definitely would. I think it's an example of taking like the film language of horror and making something aesthetically that most people wouldn't describe as horror. Like, there's no monsters or like creepy people in a hill somewhere or something. It's skinheads in a punk bar, and but the way that it's shot and the way that it uses its characters and the way that it tries to get you anxious and paranoid and stuff, is very much a horror film in my mind.
Okay. Is it something you'd recommend?
Oh, definitely. It's probably one of the best films of this year. I absolutely loved it. It is fantastic.
Okay, I'll have to check it out. For me, while we were talking about Sam Raimi, I watched the first episode of Ash vs. the Evil Dead. It's something I'd been meaning to get to for a while, and it was okay. There's
Yeah,
a
I've been
lot.
meaning to get to that for a while because I'm a big fan of Evil Dead 2. I'm not a big fan of the first one, probably for reasons previously mentioned. It's just kind of an old, gross horror movie. Whereas two's
Um,
really cool. Like,
yeah, two's good. Although it is half a sequel to the first one.
yeah, definitely. But I do like Army of Darkness as well, but that's kind of a different movie.
Yeah, I haven't seen that in a long time, so I can't really talk too much to that. But Ash vs. the Evil Dead seemed alright from the first episode. It's clearly taking its time. It didn't like jump straight into how Sam Raimi does his movies. It's much more of a slower burn.
Well, if you think about Evil Dead 2, that does take a while to get going, really.
Yeah, I guess, but it's almost about a 40-minute episode, which is most of the runtime of Evil Dead 2 setting up.
Oh, that's true, yeah.
But it's got that same kind of, I guess, smarmy camp thing that Bruce Campbell does now.
That's kind of his whole thing now.
Yeah, it's very much what you'd expect it to be from what I've seen. I think I'll keep going with it. It seemed all right so far.
Do you think it's better than its name implies?
What does the name imply?
Well, I think like Ash versus Evil Dead, it kind of sounds like they'll be playing up the fact that Ash is back, that sort of thing, you know. And it would
That's kind of
focus a
what it
lot
is
on
after the reboot movie from a couple years ago that I've also been meaning to get to.
like the picture I get in my head of the title Ash versus Evil Dead is like more of the Army of Darkness version of Ash. Like
Well,
the guy that's like spitting out one-liners and stuff.
That's kind of what it seems like in this, to a degree. Except he's kind of an old, sad guy trying to be hip like he was, quote unquote hip like he was at that point. So, you know, the Bruce Campbell thing.
Is that kind of played for laughs?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, it's an Evil Dead movie. It's an Evil Dead thing. It's more comedy than anything else.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting direction to go in because, like Duke Nukem, for example, like some of the people that like criticize Duke Nukem Forever talk about how that he comes off like an old creepy uncle who thinks he's cool. So it's kind of funny that you've got Ash vs. Evil Dead, where he's very much a Duke Nukem type character, but it's played in that way where he comes off old and probably a bit creepy.
Yeah, the main difference is Ash vs. the Evil Dead is self-aware, which is not the case with Duke Nukem.
You kind of have to play a character like that self-aware, otherwise it just comes off fucking gross and weird.
Yeah. But anyway, let's take a quick break before we start talking about Shadow of the Vampire.
Okay.
Hi, this is Mike, and I'm here real quick to talk about all our social media stuff, just like last time. First off, you can, as always, for Horror Kiwi, email us at movies@gamekiwi.net. We're also available on Facebook at facebook.com/thegamekiwi, as well as Twitter @thegamekiwi. If you're interested in our video game stuff or just want a different place to listen to our podcast, you can catch us at youtube.com/gamekiwi, or we're on iTunes, Google Play, and also podcasts.gamekiwi.net. That's where you can find just our podcast stuff. In addition, on the 29th of October 2016, starting at 11 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time? Pacific Time, California Time, me and AP from our Yakuza Let's Play, and maybe some other people, will be playing video games for 24 hours live on twitch.tv/GameKiwi to benefit the UC Davis Children's Hospital through Extra Life. Last year we raised about a little over $1,000, and this year we hope to double that. But we can only do it with your help. So please watch us, have a good time with us, and most importantly, donate to help us help some sick kids. UC Davis is my alma mater, so it means even more to me than it did last year. So please, 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 please help us out here. It'll be a good time, I promise. And if you do donate before we start on October 29th at 11 a.m., you will be able to go to a Google form that I set up to help AP suggest toppings to put on a sandwich that he'll eat for dinner live on camera for you to watch. You can find our Extra Life page at extra-life.org/participant/GameKiwi, or for something much shorter and easier to remember, go to bit.ly/GKEL2016. So yeah, I can't stress enough. Please check that out. Please help us. Please donate. All donations are tax deductible. So yeah. And then lastly, before I head out, I got some more podcast recommendations from podcast buddies of mine. So first off, be sure to listen to Aaron and James talk about their various obsessions, both lasting and fleeting, on Unabashedly Obsessed. Or join John Bailey as he reviews the latest movie releases and goes into discussions on movies and filmmaking. And finally, but not leastly, go check out the Midpoint podcast, where Lucy and Tom try to make sense of a TV show, starting from one of the episodes smack dab in the middle of it. These are all great podcasts, great hosts, great content, and they're all on iTunes. And they have their own stuff that you can find, Facebook and stuff, by a Facebook search or Google search. So please check them out. It's all good stuff. So yeah, with that out of the way, let's get back to the podcast with 2000's Shadow of the Vampire. And we're back, and we're talking about Shadow of the Vampire. First thing I have to say about this movie, there is a name that popped up in the opening credits that I didn't expect, and that would be Nicolas Cage.
Nicolas Cage, as the producer.
Yeah, this was apparently the first movie that he produced.
Didn't he have a string of movies that he produced that didn't do well, and then he kind of lost a lot of money?
Well, he also lost a lot of money because he went and bought a ton of shit like castles.
Yeah, that too.
And that's why he's in 20 movies a year, because he has debt to pay off. Or did. I don't know. He might have finished it and he just likes doing whatever now. I don't know.
Yeah, who knows? I gather he probably doesn't earn a lot every movie. He's probably only paid like 100,000 or something. He
also seems like the kind of guy who just likes doing whatever.
Yeah, his acting is very much evidence of that. He just kind of does whatever.
Yeah, he seems like he just enjoys his craft.
And then occasionally you get a performance from him that's just flat and kind of bored, and it's really disappointing.
Yeah. Anyways, what do you think of this movie?
I don't know what I think of this movie, to be honest. It's a very strange movie.
It's different, isn't it?
Yeah, it's different, but it's different in a way that I think is maybe not a good thing.
Really? I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Yeah, I kept thinking about, like, what is this movie's identity? What is it trying to be? Like, what is the reason this was made, and why does this exist, and everything? And I couldn't really come up with a satisfying answer. I think it's kind of like when, like, if you're a young artist and you're like 16 or 17 or something, not like majority of the time, the sorts of work that people churn out when they're that age is just stuff that sounds like the things that they already like, or looks like the things that they already like, and they think by associating themselves with things that are already great, they will kind of, become great by osmosis or something, And I think that I get a bit of that vibe from this film, where they think if they associate themselves with Nosferatu very strongly, that kind of that greatness will rub off on them and this will be a great film too. But I think as a result, like a side effect, this movie kind of doesn't have its own identity. Like, it doesn't know whether or not it's trying to be like a weird, like, comedy or doesn't know whether or not it's trying to be like kind of dark and strange. And yeah, like this movie's tonally is all over the place. It's really hard to pin down what this thing is even trying to do.
I feel like it knew it was trying to be funny in kind of a weirdly tongue-in-cheek way. I feel like that's pretty clear from the conversation they were having at the campfire when Orlok was there and they were asking about vampire stuff and they were kind of joking. And he was dead serious because of what he is.
Yeah, I agree that it definitely has a comedic element to it, but a lot of moments where there's just long strings of like not a lot going on and like the whole plot of this movie is being played kind of straight but it's inherently kind of ridiculous. And especially like if you look at Willem Dafoe's performance, it's super hammy and it's definitely appropriate for the character he's playing.
It should be noted that he got an Academy Award nomination for this character.
Well, like casting him as Orlok is kind of inspired casting. Like he's brilliant in this movie, but
he's very good in this movie.
And so is John Malkovich. He's definitely playing that kind of unhinged, obsessed person very well, that kind of a sociopath. Yeah, it's just I think the movie doesn't really have a strong identity of its own, and that's kind of my issue with it.
I don't feel the same, but I also don't necessarily have much to back that up with. I feel like it did know what it was going for. Probably for the same reasons you think the opposite.
Well, what's an example of what you mean?
I mean, I think it's trying to be about as, I don't know, it's hard for me to put into words.
Which is kind of where I'm coming from as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just couldn't articulate what the hell this movie was doing, and I don't necessarily think that makes it a bad film. I just think it makes it kind of a confused and a bit of a messy film. But it's definitely a fun watch. There's some good stuff in here, definitely.
Because while it may be those things, at the same time, that 90 minutes of that movie passed by really, really quickly for me.
Yeah, I would agree.
Kind of, I guess enthralling's a good way to put it, isn't it?
Yeah, and like, even if the movie was worse, like, the entire thing is worth it just to see Willem Dafoe hamming it up and Malkovich's, like, insane weirdo thing going on. Like, we talk about on the Monster podcast a lot about people with obsessions and how that destroys them and stuff. And I think if, like, the most concrete thing about this film is that it's a movie about obsession destroying something, someone, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And like, even if you destroy yourself with an obsession, something great can come out of it, but you just a lot of stuff is lost in the process.
Yeah, because he didn't really destroy himself. He just killed like 5 people and a vampire.
Yeah, I guess the whole point of the film is that those people are mortal, but the film itself lived on, like, it's immortal.
Yeah. Which he basically said that at the very beginning when, what's her name, Greta was complaining about being in this rather than being in stage plays.
Yeah, and she remembers that just before she dies as well. So I think that very much is the film's thesis statement, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the immortality of film.
Yeah. See, you found it. Kinda.
Yeah, kinda. I mean, I've had arguments with people before about, like, nasty auteurs and the effect they have on people, and, you know, like, Alfred Hitchcock was, by all accounts, like, kind of a psychopath and kind of an asshole.
Kubrick was too, wasn't he?
Yeah, definitely. He's like, he would do things where he would get 70 takes of the same scene just so he can get it absolutely perfect, but drive people nuts in the process. And I think
Ridley Scott did that with Alien.
Yeah, and it's a hard thing to argue about because, like, people's lives are destroyed in the process, but they They create something that lasts forever, and
Mhm.
it's. But I don't necessarily like agree with the idea that auteurs need to behave that way in order to get something great. Like you can have a filmmaker who's a nice person, who's an auteur that creates stuff that is great anyway. Like you look
Such
at people
as
like David Lynch, for example, is by all accounts one of the nicest people on the planet, and he's created several like great films. So like I wouldn't agree with the movie's kind of statement that having that destructive creative force is like required to make something great. But it is what it is, Sometimes that does happen, and it's kind of
Mhm.
something you need to acknowledge when it
Yeah.
comes to film. Like Roman Polanski, for example, that dude is not a good guy, but he's created a lot of good films.
No, that guy's a piece of shit.
Sometimes you just need to recognize that bad people make good movies sometimes, and it's unfortunate, but it happens.
Yeah. And if you want to enjoy anything, you kind of have to disassociate yourself from some of the people who were involved in its creation, or else you'll
Yeah,
probably
definitely.
find something to hate about most stuff.
It's kind of the whole like, and even David Lynch has made this argument. Like the thing is the thing, the person who made it and their effect on the film. When you're watching it, none of that is supposed to matter, you know. The thing
Mhm.
is on the screen, and you're watching it. You just experience it as it exists, and like having those thoughts in your mind about who made it and everything. It's not really relative. Like it's not really relevant to the thing. And then
Yeah.
you get cases where creators are often wrong about their own work. Like
Mhm.
like George Lucas, for example, he's completely 100% wrong about his own work.
Yeah. Yeah, he is.
He's kind of a hack.
Yeah, he kind of is. He got lucky.
100% lucky. But yeah, do you think there's anything more to say about Shadow of the Vampire?
No, it's a fun movie. I think it's enhanced a little bit by having seen Nosferatu first.
I think this movie was like definitely somebody had kind of a silly what if idea, and that
Mhm.
movie was made entirely on the back of that silly idea.
Yeah. And I think it really kind of echoes Nosferatu pretty strongly, even apart from it being about that movie. It kind of has points where it kind of meanders and then nothing happens, and then about halfway through it starts building, and then a lot of shit happens at the end. Um, and also they deviate from the original story at points.
Yeah, I thought that was strange. Like they recreate some of the shots perfectly, and then some of the stuff that they're recreating was never in the film anyway.
Yeah,
And the only argument that I can make is maybe that was stuff that was left on the cutting room floor when they was actually editing it together,
maybe. But yeah, that's all I got to say about Shadow of the Vampire. I thought it was pretty. What do you think of it as double feature?
Um, hmm. I don't know. I think you can get the broad strokes of Nosferatu pretty easily. I'm not sure if you're just looking for a fun movie to watch, you can kind of just get somebody to like describe Nosferatu to you, and you'll get the broad strokes of Shadow of the Vampire pretty easily. I think.
Mhm.
Like Shadow of the Vampire is definitely a much more enjoyable film, just by virtue of it being much more recent and much more developed. But yeah, I guess I just at the risk of repeating myself, if you're like a filmmaker or a critic, like this is a very interesting double feature. Definitely, maybe not 100% successful, as in I enjoyed the hell out of it, but yeah, Shadow of the Vampire is fun. Not perfect, but definitely worth watching because of Defoe's performance and everything.
Okay then. Uh, I guess I more or less feel the same. I think still feel it's more successful than you, but
Hey,
otherwise, I agree.
that's a good thing, man.
That's
I
opinions.
I think if I came out the other end of this having much more of a good time and everything, then yeah, I'm jealous of that. I like liking stuff, man.
Liking
Hating
stuff's
stuff is the
good.
squares.
But anyway, that's this week of Horror Kiwi. Hopefully next week we'll be back on schedule with Tenebrae and Hellraiser, but I'm not going to make promises. But we will talk about them at some point this month. and then I still don't know what the other two movies are going to be. So you'll find out when I do. But until next time, I'm Mike.
And I'm Katoda.
This has been Horror Kiwi. Thanks for listening. And as always, keep it spooky.